different kind of now we know we're on the record. This is going to be a different kind of session. This is going to be an open conversation. So I have some slides that I'm going to load up, but don't panic. They're prompts for us to have a guided discussion. Some of you know that I've also taught classes for Cronkite, Business and Future of Journalism, and my 473 class members. I'll also teach that now at UF, but I found that they do a lot better in guided discussions if we all follow a few ground rules together, and I want all of you to do that too. So I'm going to start the presentation and share that. And someone give me a thumbs up that you can see it. Right on, right on. All right, so I'm Rusty Coates. I'm the Executive Director of Journalism Funding Partners. Our mission is to build the diversity, sustainability, and depth of local media by connecting the newsrooms to funders and stewarding those relationships. And as you all know, being in this space, that's a rather novel space to be in. There's not a lot of people who are celebrating their 10th anniversary of doing this. And so we're all learning as we go. And I hope this discussion will reflect that. So first, I want to go over like logistics of how we're going to spend this hour together. I prefer it if you would have your cameras on during this conversation. As I've told way too many people, I used to do stand-up comedy, and the hardest room I have ever played is a Zoom room where everyone has their cameras off, because you got nothing on that. So at least give that to me and give that to the people who are going to be speaking as well. To get my attention, just use the chat or raise your hand. You can use that function in this. And I ask that you do that because the fourth bullet, that not everyone is a type A extrovert and walks into a room knowing exactly what he or she is going to say before you've even asked the question. My wife reminds me of this all the time because I am a type A extrovert. And I ask you to be really generous with each other. I mean, this is as I said, this is a novel space. We're all learning, and I want to hear from all of you and hear your ideas. So does that sound good to you all? A good way to spend this hour with that way you get all of you as panelists and not just a handful of people. And let's be honest, after this morning's opening sessions with those 4 Marvel superhero of news philanthropy speaking, I think we're all drafting behind their expertise. So let's just be generous with each other. So the next thing I want to say is, as you introduce yourself, talk about who you are, because we all know much about each other, but may not know each other intimately. Tell who you are, how your for-profit newsroom has pursued philanthropic support, or if you haven't tried that kind of fundraising, why your organization is interested. That way we don't take the entire first 20 minutes going around the horn, and you get to tell us about yourself as we go into the questions, which we'll go into now. So if you're a for-profit outlet, how do you think about messaging to potential donors, individual, institutional, to support your journalism? And how do you explain that you decided to be a for-profit entity and pursue philanthropic support? And to prime that pump, I'll talk a little bit about how I just had this experience earlier this week with a funder that wants to fund into climate coverage at a television station. And why would I want to do that if this television station is a going business concern? And the answer to that in this case was they may not get to covering climate science with the depth that you or the community want and deserve. And this guarantees that regardless of their business model, whether they're for-profit or nonprofit, you are directly funding journalism. You are not trying to fund their email strategy. You are not trying to fund their membership strategy. You are funding journalism, and you're funding the impact that's going to have. And if you can find a better way to directly plug into that pipeline, I'm all ears. So I open it up. Who would like to be our first participant to answer this question? This is where teaching as a faculty associate, where you do it for the love and not for the money, comes in handy, because then you're fearless about calling on people. So
how about I offer myself up? Hey everyone, my name is Andreas Gebhardt, and I'm not actually in a newsroom. So I'm adjacent to this whole area, and I'm here to learn more about generally the area of philanthropic funding. I'm the co-founder of a startup called Hypothesis. I come from the news media space, but Hypothesis is right now in a space where we are looking for hopefully philanthropic funding that can get us towards MVP to let us then later ramp up our operations. Hypothesis is an app that uses predictions to essentially build a better news feed. I can go into much more detail, but that would go probably too far here. So I don't want to make this into a pitch, but we're news adjacent and really interested in this area.
terrific. Thank you, Andreas. Thank you.
I'll go next. My name is Renata Hill, and my news organization, which is also a startup, is called Mindset News. And I'm a one-person newsroom so far. I'm going to be covering mental health in Colorado. And I'm in the second to the last week of the GNI Startups boot camps. And so for the last 8 weeks have been building this startup and learning about how to do that and be an entrepreneur and run a business. And I just registered as an LLC, but my goal is to become a nonprofit myself. And so I'm interested in fiscal sponsorship and pitching to people, even though I am an LLC.
Great, thank you, thank you. All right, I'm going to now pick on a couple of people. Mr. Gibbs.
I knew that was coming.
Mr. Gibbs, and tell us about your background, and then people will know why I've asked you to come to the center of the stage.
Yeah, happy to. I'm Rodney Gibbs. I'm newly with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which is a legacy publication here in Atlanta, Georgia. Been around for over a century. Previously, I was with Texas Tribune, a nonprofit newsroom. Just turned 12 this week, I think today, actually. And so, you know, as some of you may know, Texas Tribune has been really great at fundraising in lots of ways, particularly from major donors and philanthropy foundations. AJC, where I now work, is new to it. And so we're tackling it under the, you know, the idea of revenue diversification. And I don't have, you know, unfortunately, we're still early to this. And so we haven't really formulated a real crisp proposition yet, or that we're taking out. And that's part of my reason to be here, is to smarten up on how to position ourselves as a for-profit institution around this. We have, you know, we're leveraging some ongoing campaigns we have.
You hear me?
Now I can. Leveraging ongoing campaigns.
Hello.
Hello, now I can hear you.
Okay, sorry. My hello there. Sorry, my wireless headphones came out. I was just saying, we're positioning a lot around right now. You know, what we do is good for democracy. It's good for civic cohesion all that. Something we're trying to get to, we haven't, again, kind of gotten the crisp way to say it yet, is equate ourselves with civic institutions in Atlanta, your museums and your hospitals and all those things. Because we do, frankly, I think it's going to be a challenge as we take these proposals out and get in front of people that we're part of a larger corporation that's a for-profit corporation that is not the newspaper, it's the parent company of the newspaper. But we were anticipating, getting a lot of questions like, well, why should I write you a check when you have this for-profit company behind you that, seems to be doing fine?
It's interesting that that the business model would be of in any interest or be a block for philanthropers for this. And I say that with this kind of context. As a consultant for more than a decade, some of my clients were actually community foundations that were in news deserts, where the newspaper closed its bureau and then no one is reporting on how those tens of millions of dollars get spent every year to improve the community. And so they were looking to become their own news entities. In fact, there are several out there that are already doing that. In how I have had some luck in presenting this, and I'd love to hear from others here, such as Sharon, of course, which is that a lot of what philanthropers want to fund into are things that make the community a better place to live. It's education, it's clean water, it's housing equity, it's economic mobility, it's the environment. And for any of you who are refugees from print and from printed newsrooms, and now are doing this on your own or have never thought of it this way, you know that those areas of coverage were never the big money makers for the newspaper anyway. But they are the things that make the community more livable and more desirable. So that's some of our messaging and how we approach it, and it has resonated. Lisa from the AP. Lisa, would you please join us?
Hi there, I'm Lisa Gibbs, Rodney's cousin, apparently. Who knows, we might be related. I am the Director of News Partnerships at AP, which means that I handle both collaborations between AP's newsroom and other organizations, as well as our grant-funded initiatives. And I mean, we have somewhat of a unique situation because we are a not-for-profit cooperative, but a for-profit company for tax status purposes. I mean, obviously being a cooperative gives us a leg up in terms of kind of getting past sort of a whatever test foundations might have around being mission driven, or, we have no investors or shareholders, so there's no profit motive, per se. But a couple things we've learned, and Sharon touches on this all the time, we look for philanthropy to help support public service journalism that isn't necessarily core to, the main function of AP, which is to provide breaking news and other services to other news outlets. The other thing I'd say is piggybacking off something you said, Rusty, which is really reinforcing the audience that we're able to deliver, and the community impact that whether we're for-profit or nonprofit, we have the power to bring our journalism to a public that needs the information to engage properly in their communities, to take action, make decisions. Focusing on those sorts of things, has been super helpful.
That's a really, really good point, and I encourage folks to make sure you write down that as a talking point. Scale does matter when you're talking to philanthropists who want to reach an audience. I've worked with Sue Cross and INN and a lot of sites there. I've worked with Chris Cruson and Lion members and the startups there. And I've worked with a lot of public radio stations. And what I've found is that, first of all, none of those groups talk to each other at any kind of scale to leverage what each other learns. And also that they all often leave out what they call legacy publications that still have a very large audience to get this message across if you're covering education, climate, what have you. So always remember your capacity for scale as being one of your selling points to philanthropers in reaching audiences. Let's go to Nick, and then I'll go to the next prompt. Nick.
Hi, everybody. Apologies about the sirens in the background if you hear them. But yeah, I'm a program manager at the New York Times focused on philanthropic partnerships. When I've talked about messaging, one thing that I think is always good to sort of talk to people about is that there's a lot of good journalism being produced through the free market commercial approach, but that doesn't address everything. There's still a lot of public service journalism that should be produced, but it isn't necessarily going to be supported through a free market approach entirely. I mean, talking about smaller school boards, it doesn't have quite the same scale that a large government might have, but it doesn't mean that's not important, but it's also not going to be addressed specifically by free market approach. So this is a good way to sort of address those needs of public service journalism that still needs to get produced, but needs to have a new refreshing approach.
That's very well said, Nick. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me go to the next one. Staffing. This often can be overlooked. If any of you have any experience from the public media arm of local journalism, you know that the reporting to grantors, even to back to CPB, can sometimes be onerous in the amount of time it takes to do this. So I want to ask all of you, how are you staffing this? Because there are reports to be written. There is leadership to be done here once you get the position, or the center of coverage, or the grant for a multi-year coverage. So how are you staffing internally? What I've seen at a few for-profit companies is some amount of centralization around this, so that the philanthropy driven journalism has its own staff of people who do some of the checks and balances of it, to make sure that the reports are done, to make sure that the story leverage meters are coming in for them. But then there's the side of raising the funds, and where does that exist in your organization? Sometimes that exists in the news part of the organization, which is a new thing. Sometimes it comes out of the development side, or if you're in a for-profit company, in the revenue side. So I'm interested in all of your, how you skin this cat. And with that, I will go to Brenda in Everett.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brenda Harrison, and I am the Journalism Development Director for the Daily Herald in Everett, Washington. It's a new position that just started in May. The newspaper found a need for philanthropic support and started to work with a community foundation in May of last year to launch an investigative journalism fund, and then added one for environmental and climate change reporting. And so that all kind of worked with a lot of coordination and effort from the executive editor on the news side. And so I work closely with the newsroom because part of my efforts is to show impact in everything that we do, and in all the ways that we communicate. I'm trying to get data that shows here's how many people are looking at these stories. Here are how many stories we're producing on this topic because the community has asked for this information. And based on the fact that they're looking at this, this is really important to them. And so that's why we're asking for your support for it, because we can't do this without your support. And so again, the executive editor has been really key in reaching out to all the reporters and looping them in and say, hey, anytime you get a positive comment, anything about the impact that your stories have had on the community, make sure you loop in Brenda. And our goal is to do an impact report in the first quarter of this coming year that will compile some of this information again to say, here's how we're making a difference in our community. This is why it's important.
Very good. Very good. One side of the staffing question as well for our discussion is was there any blowback from the newsroom itself about this? Was there any trepidation from the newsroom itself for this kind of funded journalism? And what did you do to assuage any worry about that? And Brenda, we'll stay with you, and then I'll ask someone to raise their hand.
I did not sense any intrepidation. In fact, I've had feedback from the reporters who said, thank you for promoting our work. Thank you. So I think it's just been a really good relationship from the get-go. I think they understand why I'm there and what the intent is, and they are willing to collaborate, and that's wonderful. It really is. And I think it's the foundation that was built before I arrived that made it possible.
Got it. Got it. Sharon, if I could be so bold to call on you, both in your Seattle experience and now in New York, but going back to Seattle, was there any kind of sell that you had to do within the newsroom, or because Mr. Blethen was behind it so strongly, did that take care of itself? Or
no, in fact, Frank Strong's support of it meant the whole newsroom was very suspicious of it. No, we had tremendous blowback when we set up Education Lab. In fact, I know I've seen a couple people from Solutions Journalism Network here, and there was like a very hard meeting with the whole newsroom when Education Lab was announced that the Gates Foundation was going to be funding it. It didn't help that David Boardman was at that point transitioning to his new job in Philadelphia.
mm-hmm.
So I think if you have, so there's a certain amount that you can address just by answering questions, right? And, you know, we had a very clear mission statement to our readers. We had a clear FAQ at the beginning with Education Lab. We did a whole listening tour with prominent education leaders and nonprofits before even launching Education Lab to ask what they thought of the concept, whether they felt this solutions journalism approach would be helpful, and also just to kind of for us to get in front of the message before we announced Education Lab and Gates Foundation funding to the public. So you can address some of that, but upfront, but otherwise you kind of have to prove it through your journalism, right? I would say a year into Education Lab, many of those journalists who had been really tough on us in that first meeting, newsroom-wide meeting, came back and said, you know, the journalism was really good. And they were actually on board to help us think of how to even improve it. So, but you know, that was also 2012. That's a long time ago. Things have really changed in the landscape. And I will say that was one of my biggest fears before I came to the New York Times, and that people would be like, why are you here contaminating our pure journalism with your dirty money? And actually, I haven't run into that. If they are, they're being very quiet.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that perspective. And while I have you on the hot seat here, how is the Times, New York Times, structured for philanthropic journalism? Are you a department of 3?
Well, we were a department of 2 people. We work in the newsroom, and we report to one of the masthead editors, Monica Drake. Okay. So there's my position, and then there's Nick, who you met earlier, who's a program manager. And I will say we have an open position, which we decided not to fill during the pandemic simply because the work was not growing quickly. And it's like, I don't want to hire someone and for them to have nothing to do. At the Seattle Times, we had a director who is, she's here in this chat, Kristen Dizon. And so I don't know how they're currently structured, but that has gone through a couple of different iterations there.
Great, thank you. Liza, you have your hand up.
Yes, hi, thank you. I am Liza Gross from Solutions Journalism Network, and I oversee the local media project. It's building solutions-based collaboratives throughout the United States. We're stewarding over a dozen at the moment. One thing that I would suggest, and to build a little bit upon what Brenda and Sharon have said, the buying needs to, or the selling needs to be constant. The moment to communicate something is not when the idea has been hatched already and all the details have been worked out. The communication with we're doing this has to be constant, maybe in an internal newsletter, maybe with a daily memo ad nauseam. You know, it cannot be the moment of the pivotal moment or the moment of the commitment. It has to be a constant communication, like we have to communicate constantly with our readers now or with our viewers. The dialogue has to be active, fluid, and flexible. And likewise, internally, that is an audience that we need to continue to cultivate.
Amen. Amen. Well said. Let me see.
Rusty, I'm sorry, I forgot to say something. Do you mind if I add?
No.
Okay, buy-in from the newsroom is really like, I actually like to think of our work as building relationships in two spheres. One is in the newsroom and one is externally with potential funders and partners. And you're constantly looking for like, what does the newsroom dream of doing that is too big for this organization to take on its own? And you're listening to funders about what things they're interested in funding, and you're trying to find the overlap. I think like a recipe of like an approach of taking something funders want this to the newsroom is like just not going to get you anywhere. Like even if you force their hand to do the journalism, it'd be a very half-ass and half-hearted, in the same way where if you come out of a morning meeting and you go to a reporter and say the managing editor wants you to do a story on X, like you're going to get a half-assed story at the end of that day. So I think this idea, like an idea has to come out of the newsroom. They need to be passionate and excited about it for it to be successful. But that doesn't mean that all the ideas they're passionate and excited about will get funded.
Well said. Yes. Nick, and then we'll move to the next prompt.
Yeah, I mean, just another note about staffing. I mean, it's obviously very important to get buy-in from your newsroom. I think one thing that sometimes gets overlooked is to have buy-in from your finance team. I mean, when you're doing for project programs, like you have to be very specific about what is being funded. You have to be very careful about that. And money can resolve a lot of things. It doesn't necessarily resolve the issue of time, and it takes time to sort of like organize that and distinguish those. So it's good to like get that buy-in from your finance team to ensure like the dollars are being spent diligently and going to the right destination.
Well said. Thank you.
Rusty, one last thought on this before we move. Just what did you say?
Sorry.
I mean, +1 to what Sharon and Nick just said, but also in the real world, even if one tries everything right, there will always be some character in the newsroom that will be recalcitrant, one or more. And you know, there comes a point where one has to stop trying to convince these people and just continue to move on. Otherwise, we'll be like the U.S. Congress and Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema. So wanted to underscore that even if you get buy-in from the newsroom, even if you do it all right, even if you are transparent, all of these things that are incredibly valuable and necessary, there will always be one or two characters that are not convincible.
That is so true. One of the best leadership lessons I learned from my wife, and I'm not saying that just to earn points because she's listening in on this. And she's a longtime newsroom leader, editor, and now runs the Consortium on Trust in Media and Technology at University of Florida. And her leadership advice was, when you pick a path, say, we are going to Atlanta. We can go by air, we can go by train, we can go by bus, We can go by horseback, but we are going to Atlanta. Everything else we can discuss, but we are going to Atlanta. And that just takes that argument off the table. And that's I found that with newsrooms that have adopted philanthropically funded journalism as well. So governance is, did I skip one? No, I did not. Governance. This is important to JFP, obviously, because we are a fiscal sponsor for a lot of the grants to for-profit newsrooms to provide, as I like to say, provide comfort on both sides. The funder for to know that someone is actually watching to make sure that the funds are going to go where they're supposed to go and executed in the way they want them executed, and that the reports are going to come in. And on the newsroom side, it also means that the funder is not going to be all up in their grill and calling all the time. We act as a buffer for that, just to make sure that the journalism gets done. So for those of you who are using funding from philanthropy, from community foundations, from family and place-based foundations, how do you approach fiscal sponsorship? Because some grants, they don't care about it. Some grantors, they really care about it. So I'll open it up to the group for hands to be raised. Here's the other reason I brought this up was because 2 weeks ago, I think you all may have seen the Devil Strip implosion of the Ohio site that was received a lot of funding and including like $200,000 from Facebook to improve its membership program, and was a co-op, launched as a co-op, so the community actually owned it. And the staff on a Friday got an email from the remaining board members, because the rest had resigned, that they had run out of money, and effective Monday, everyone was laid off. And if you are in the philanthropically funded journalism space, that is got to be one of your top nightmares, is that you fiscally mismanage the money. So that's why I ask this here is, how are you managing that money, and how are you making sure that you are using it well and to the funder's desire? Kristen.
Yeah, I can jump in on that. So I'm Kristen Dazan. I am the development director for community funded journalism at the Seattle Times. And, we, as many people here know, have had sort of a growing portfolio of work over the really 10 years that this work has been underway, and that Sharon was a really key part of developing and building. So we do use fiscal sponsorship primarily these days at the Seattle Foundation, which is our local community foundation.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
We have increased that relationship over time to bring sort of more projects there. And it's kind of like, what is that balance of governance, right? So they are definitely providing all of the fiscal oversight and making sure that everything that we're doing is compliant with their nonprofit tax status and their reporting requirements, for the most part, because, the vast majority of this funding goes directly towards supporting journalism, right? The actual salaries of the people doing the work. It's personnel costs. And so, there doesn't tend to be a lot of scrutiny on that, because they're the people who are sort of carrying out the work. We're not crossing lines in terms of advocacy or other things that would get them in trouble. So it's not something that they're generally concerned about. And you really develop that relationship of trust over time. They definitely scrutinize, we have quarterly reports that are due to, like, Vulcan, the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation. We have annual reports that are due to the Gates Foundation or others. And so they are definitely taking a look at those and scrutinizing those, both on the fiscal side of the house, as well as the, what did we do? What are we reporting about the impacts that we're having, the metrics, and so forth. So I think it's really about having a strong partnership and sort of trying to build on that over time and increasing that trust.
That's great. And you built that over a decade now, right? I mean, that kind of trust is just now baked in, but you have to earn that every day. I mean, what was I saying earlier, that you can always get more money, but you can't get more credibility.
That's right.
Yeah. No, community foundations are a great outlet for this, for organizations. Some funders want something that is a third party, and by that I mean if your company also has a foundation or a nonprofit that you use as a fiscal sponsor. I've seen some funders blanch at that because they think it's a little too cozy in the family. Some are okay with it, and with some of JFP's partners, they don't need the funder doesn't need a fiscal sponsor at all. It's giving the money directly to the news organization and doesn't require anything more than that. So it's kind of all over the place, which is why I'm interested in what all of your models are for that. Liza, would you like to weigh in?
Yes, perhaps our experience can be of some help here. We are not exactly a fiscal sponsor, but some of our collaboratives are not legal entities when they get together. They are a federation of news organizations and news adjacent organizations like a library or an academic institution that get together for the purposes of forming the collaborative. So we make available funding to them we are the recipients of a grant from the Knight Foundation, and out of that grant, we give them funds so that the collaborative can move forward. And we ask for periodic reports, but also we attend periodic meetings and we make sure that we notify them if they are underspending, if they are overspending, if we put some restrictions on how the funds are going to be spent. Definitely the bulk of the fund is spent on reporting trips, on audience engagement events, on things directly related to the work of the collaborative. So we are not per se a fiscal agent, but we act as one in terms of having some oversight on how the funding is spent, because of course then we need to account to the Knight Foundation on how those funds were spent. Now, some of our collaboratives choose to get a fiscal sponsor. And so, for example, our New Hampshire collaborative, one of the members, Public TV, acted as accepted to be the fiscal, accepted the role of fiscal sponsor for the collaborative. So they received the funding from us and they disbursed to the collaborative as needed. But we, whether it's the fiscal sponsor or whether it's us directly, we try to avoid giving out the lump sum. And Chris Rudisill is here. He is the project manager for the Charlotte Journalism Collaborative, and I'm sure he has something valuable to contribute here.
Chris, you'd like to come off mute and share with us?
I was just also going to add that collaboration has created opportunities for us to utilize those partners as fiscal sponsors because we already have that relationship built. So for instance, we've been able to apply for other funding from the local Arts and Science Council here in Charlotte using the library as our fiscal sponsor. They're already a partner of the Charlotte Journalism Collaborative. And so it creates that kind of trust that's needed to have for those fiscal sponsorships for other funding. And now as we come out of our time with Local Media Project, officially, we're looking at partnership at a greater partnership with one of those nonprofit entities to be housed under them as a fiscal, where they'll be our fiscal sponsor moving forward, hopefully.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. What we found too, I'd love to hear if others are finding this, is that once a funder gets comfortable with doing this, because it is novel for some of them, there's a multiplier effect within that they say, well, this has worked really, really well in Raleigh. Where else can I do that? And we'll say, how about Charlotte? How about Winston-Salem? How about the Outer Banks? Because you're place-based and that's what you care about. And then we see that grow. So sometimes the management of the grant gives the funder some amount of, again, comfort to expand on that work because they know that it's being done well. I also want to ask if anyone has had trouble explaining this. This goes back to communication, but explaining this up the chain for any of you who are in companies that own multiple properties and have, say, corporate legal. And I say this because I sent along an agreement from a funder with our fiscal sponsor agreement on it to a newspaper that had a funded reporter that the funder wanted to have. The agreement made its way to corporate legal, where corporate legal had never seen an agreement like this before, had never done funded journalism before, and sent back the agreement with all the fiscal sponsorship language intentionally deleted, which led to a conversation with their corporate legal of, I know you've not heard this before in your job, but no, all of that language is going to stay in or you're not going to get it. Has anyone had any of those issues? Sharon, at an organization as large as the Times, is that ever an issue with your legal review?
I'm going to make Nick take this one.
Nick?
Could you, I mean, that was a lot. Could you, what can you shorten the question by any chance?
Yeah, as you deal with internal governance at a for-profit company, they may not be familiar with the the shoreline of nonprofit governance. Is that an education that you have to do often internally?
Yeah. I mean, you definitely have to. I mean, it always helps to bring in like guidance from someone else, also like. Someone like not necessarily within the organization, but like a peer. That's always something that's helpful. And you have to sweat over it. You have to like check in with I mean, as I said before, you have to check in with your finance team to ensure that like, yeah, you can do what you're going to say you're going to do. You need to occasionally, depending on how you're distributing it, check in with like your audience team or how you tag things. It's certainly something that takes a while, and like be upfront with people about like the review might take a long time. With that said, like understand that like there's a power imbalance with legal reviews. I've been on the other side where I worked at Knight Foundation, so like I know that like if someone was reviewing the agreement and said, actually we don't want to do this, I'm like, all right, well then you probably don't have much negotiating power there either.
Right.
But people are I mean, I would say is like people are generally like not, so long as you like take the time to really explain it with them, it's worth putting in the investment and the time it takes to go through things clearly. Bullet point your questions, be very precise with them. And sometimes it helps just to like do like 80% of the work. Like, I mean, for us, one thing that sort of helped is like, hey, I am going to draft my own like memorandum of understanding. I'm not a lawyer, but if I do 80% of the work of like understanding, like this is generally what we want to do, the legal side can use that. I'm like, all right, you did 80% of the work. Now I'm going to like get rid of all the things that you're terrible at and you use that to go forward.
Yes, very much so. I think one of the smartest things we've heard today came from Fraser in the first session, where she said the back of the house often is as important as the front of the house. And if you do 80% of the back of the house, you're better off in getting this off the ground of all the legwork.
Yeah, it certainly helps to have like as much done. I mean, legal departments are always going to be very busy. So like if you can do as much as possible, where they only have to come in and like basically set up the shop for them, and then they get to be the ones who finish it up.
That's great. Chris, let's hear from you again, and then we'll move on to the next prompt.
I'm sorry, I didn't lower my hand.
Oh, okay. That's okay. If COVID and Zoom, being Zoomaholics has taught us nothing at all, I think it's taught us to be forgiving of each other, having dogs, pets, and technical snafus. And if it hasn't taught you that, you've done it wrong. With accessibility, this came up in another session as well. How do you respond to funders who request that all journalism funded by their philanthropy be available to everyone in the community and not kept behind a metered paywall or membership? Everyone has an opinion on this, like everyone has a navel. So weigh in on this because I want to hear from you.
Hey, Rusty, I'll chime in.
Okay.
I know that contrary to what I said at the beginning of this, that we're new to philanthropic fundraising, philanthropic. We have done a fair amount of Report for America work, which is largely funded by Philanthropy. And for those type of the content generated from that, we do flag that separately in our CMS, so that's always in front of the paywall. And so that's our concession to that requirement, that it be free and accessible. Is that okay? Anything generated by this funded these funded positions is now and forevermore a free piece of content. If we, down the road, if we squint and imagine having a lot more philanthropic support, I imagine we'll have some kind of more challenging conversations about how to manage things like that.
Anjanette, and
Yes.
apologies if I mispronounced that.
You know what? You nailed it, and no one does. So, so thank you. We do pretty much a similar process as Rodney was saying. We, Report for America work that's usually out in front of the paywall, and we make decisions on a case-by-case basis. But what I think is interesting is we've had a funder or two that is interested not just in supporting this work, but supporting our future as a business. And so then we're able to say, okay, we'll put most of it in front of the paywall and offer it for free, but then we'll put one or two behind the paywall so that we're able to say, because of your contribution to our work, we were also able to increase our number of subscribers. And we think that's a good way to manage some of this too, if the funder is willing. Sometimes they're just hard and fast and say, this is equitable work and we want it to be free.
Right. And remind me where you are.
Oh, I'm sorry. I am the Senior News Director for Digital at the Detroit Free Press. And we're still very new to a lot of this, but that's our experience so far.
I got it. Other opinions about this or other practices more. Yes, ma'am. I see Sharon.
I feel like I've been involved in all kinds. Like at the Seattle Times, everything was behind the paywall, but we felt like these initiatives were not going to produce enough stories per month for you to hit the meter. So if you're just coming for these funded stories, you were going to be able to see them for free. Now, if you're looking at other stories, you're going to start hitting the paywall. One of our initiatives in the New York Times Headway is going to be outside the paywall. That was negotiated at the beginning. My guess is if we were to do that again and start those types of conversations with funders again, we would have to have a more thorough conversation with the business side as well. And then our Disability Journalism Fellowship, however, the journalism produced from that is behind the paywall of the New York Times. And in the way we think about it, we've thought about it so far, of course, this is all subject to change in the future, is that what is the funder funding, right? For the Headway funders, they're actually funding the journalism itself. And for that to be available in the public world for dialogue, conversation, reaction. And then for the fellowship, we're actually funding the training of this fellow. So the journalism is actually not the product of the program. So in that case, then we feel like, okay, it's okay for that journalism to be behind the paywall.
Got it. Thank you. Liza.
Rusty, I just want to add that some our collaboratives have encountered this issue. I am sorry to say that top of my head, I cannot tell you how they have resolved it. But if you want to drop your email in the chat, I'll be happy to put you in touch if you want to further explore this issue with the ones that really have dealt with it and looked for a solution.
Thank you. Thank you. For us, it's a conversation with the funder. I mean, if the funder wants it, then we have that conversation with the news organization about it. As Sharon pointed out, if you're coming only for this coverage, chances are you're not going to hit the paywall on those things, just consuming that. But it is an ongoing, it's a very dynamic conversation as everyone is focused on reader revenue. I can't believe I even said reader revenue because it's become such a buzzword in the industry. It's like we couldn't discover reader revenue until 5 years ago, and then we couldn't stop talking about it. But it is a dynamic conversation, and if you're just getting started in this space, just know that that's one of the headwinds internally you'll run into, and for good reason. For good reason. That's how we face it. Now, open Scrum. What else should we be talking about when it comes to funding into for-profit? I can think of a dozen more prompts to throw at you, but I'd rather hear some of your own questions for each other because Philanthropy has been generous enough to bring us all together for this. So raise your hand even if you just have a question.
Rusty, maybe it would make sense at this point to take down the slide so we can all see each other.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. How about that? There we go. Great idea. Thank you, Yossi. Well, are any of you funding it to, oh, there you are, Rebecca. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I was just going to ask if I could add in something from an earlier part of the conversation. I'm Rebecca Foreman. I'm the Director of Advancement for the Philanthropist Institute. And although we are a nonprofit, I handle and manage a lot of the fundraising that happens with the Inquirer. So although they are not owned for someone else's profit, they are still technically a for-profit. And there's a whole chat about expenditure responsibility. We were just chatting early when we were chatting earlier about the about like working with the newsroom. I want to just point sort of to two things that we have been like good relationship builders for us that are really hard in COVID times, but were a lot better, you know, when we were in the office. We started roundtables where we would bring donors into the office, and they would sit in a news meeting, they would have a tour of the newsroom, they would get to sort of chat with our leadership team and a few folks from the Inquirer. And I tell you, when these started, it was very much like they sit silently on the side, no one says anything, they don't get to interact with any of the journalists, yada, yada, yada. And I think that one of the things that our news organization, our journalists often forget or don't realize because they're not steeped in the world of philanthropy is that the relationship a funder or a donor has on the journalism side is very different from a relationship they have with any other organization they're making a grant to. So we as news organizations need to learn, and they as funders need to learn, and they may misstep a little bit. And we're really thoughtful about, like at the Institute, we are sort of the firewall. But I was always very taken by how much resistance there was to these initial news meetings. And we were like, let's just try it out. Let's see how it goes. And by the end of this like 5-6 sort of event series, it was not our donors approaching the editors and reporters. It was the editors and reporters approaching our donors who are business leaders in the community, because these are their sources. These are people they write about and companies they write about. And it was almost like once everyone was human in a room together, so much of that anxiety really sort of washed away. And we did a lot of like, let's just try one. Let's see how it goes. We can always stop this. We say that a lot about funding. We don't have to take the money. Like, and I tell you, nothing stops someone in their tracks more than like, what I'm in control. I have the ability to say no to this. Everybody on the journalism side wants the resources. They want to do more of their great work. But we always like to like approach things. I was just sort of thinking about this when we were talking about that relationship with like let's just see how it goes. We'll take it. Let's like take it one step at a time. And we always end up sort of getting to a really, really good place. even if we didn't start from a really, really good place. So I've just found that like it takes time, and we've had to remind the editorial team a lot that like, just like this is also new for these funders. And so I just think that's just really important. They don't know how to behave differently, or the way they should be. It's just different than the way they behave with other grantees.
That's so important. Just demystifying it and de-demonizing it, actually makes, as I found, it actually makes the journalism better, because it makes it more grounded in its community, rather than either parachute journalism or tourist with a typewriter kind of journalism. Andreas, and then Chris, and then I'll turn it back to you, Yossi and company.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a bit of a question. So I've listened to a lot of you guys here, and also in some of the previous conversations, speak to the trust building, the duration of some of your relationships with some of these funders, the ongoing nature of it, which all speaks to relatively small grants, relatively focused grants for a specific project or for certain things, as opposed to what Stuart was talking about earlier, where he was essentially advocating for kind of a shock and awe approach, right? If you have something, if you have a lot of money to give as a funder, give it soon and early, and then let's get it out of here. What is your guys' general kind of experience in this space, especially for those of you who have done this for years now? Is there more of a shift towards Stuart's point of view in general? Is this something that is just unique to his ability or the ability of very wealthy funders, as opposed to a lot of other organizations? What's the general kind of approach that many of you guys take or see?
Who wants to take that?
Well, I guess I'll just say that I think, like, in this room, Andreas, you're talking to a lot of people who work for legacy news institutions.
Sure.
Right. So the idea of asking, we're actually like just not the people who are asking for that kind of money versus like, but there have been many nonprofit journalism organizations that have been started up fully with philanthropic funding, right? Or purchased outright, right? There's the for-profits that have been purchased outright by wealthy people. And then there are like the wealthy people have funded large nonprofit things like ProPublica or Texas Tribune. So I feel like that's the kind of target people who would know more about what you're asking about.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Great response, Sharon. Thank you.
Just to add off on that, I mean, I don't know if it specifically answers your question, but generally, like, for particularly with startup development, I feel like if you're going to take the philanthropic approach, just understand that like philanthropists like to hold hands when they're like do this together. Like, they don't want to be the only one out there. They like, you can't say like, oh yeah, we're gonna like work and approach this other person. They have the ability to like call that other person and say, hey, are you backing this? They all talk to each other. So yeah, they want to be holding hands together when they start out something.
That is such a great point. I think we know that because we're in journalism, because we all talk to each other. But as a great piece of advice my father gave me years ago was whatever industry you go into, remember they're all small and we all talk. And that's the truth about philanthropy as well. They all talk. And so a good reputation with one will spread as quickly as a bad reputation will spread. So always keep that in mind. Rodney, did you have one last thing before I turn it back to the hosts?
No, I was
okay.
New topic. It's fine.
Okay. Well, thank you. Well, thank you all for spending an hour with each other at this conference. I hope all of you are looking forward to watching a film together. That's going to be an interesting experience this evening. And I hope to see you all again tomorrow. Yossi and our hosts, do you have any parting words for them?
No, Mabedi, feel free to close us out, but thank you, Rusty, for leading this conversation. It was amazing. Thank you all for being here, and we hope to see you at 7 o'clock Eastern tonight for the screening of Storm Lake, which I'm dropping the link into the chat if you haven't registered yet. It's terrific, and we hope you'll be able to make it. If not, it will be available on demand at that link through Friday night, and we'll be back tomorrow at 11:30 a.m. Eastern with a conversation with Mario Luge from Justice Funders and Mika Sifri, who's a writer and journalist, on rethinking the role of development professionals in philanthropy. It's going to be terrific. I've seen part of it, and you won't want to miss it. So have a great evening, and thank you all again.
Thank you all. I dropped my email address in there if you want to keep the conversation going. So thank you all.